Vincent, who is the developer for the Riverwalk, and he's been working with the town and with some other property owners in the area.
And the last time we had a sort of PowerPoint type briefing was in the previous administration, maybe
Can you speak louder?
a year and a half ago. Okay, I'm the owner of Davis Riverwalk, and today I'm going to just give everybody a general update briefly, and then we'll do a bit more of a deep dive on the amenities of Davis Riverwalk that we think might be good points for collaboration in terms of general public use in various capacities. First, it's really good from a contextual standpoint to understand what the riverfront area really is. It's about a 13-acre strip that includes the Davis Riverwalk tract, which is a mixed-use project of residential, commercial, and green space, and the Davis Riverfront Park, which I think Mayor Schmidt negotiated back in the day. It was a visionary thing. You got 5 acres from Allegheny Power. That's today's Riverfront Park. And then there's the old motel property, which we know has notoriously had that dilapidated motel on it. And it now has a status of having an unknown commercial, probably mixed-use development going in there. Let's take a closer look at the footprints of these 3 properties that comprise the riverfront. You've got from left to right the remainder after 10 outsells of the Riverwalk tract. That's got my name on it, and it's outlined in green, Johnson. And then you see the old motel site is now owned by a fellow named Steve White. And I think something that not everyone knows is that the old motel site has a peninsula or a panhandle on it that's about 90 feet wide, and it goes behind many of the buildings on Main Street and then shares a boundary with the Riverwalk tract. And there are things underneath it and on it that are not deeded. The third parcel is the Parks and Rec, approximately 5 acres that we all know and love very much. So that's just bear this in mind in terms of the geographical layout, because it helps you understand some of the other things we're doing and suggesting. This is an update on Riverwalk property sales, or what we call out sales to date. This is my first time ever being a real estate developer. I just love Davis and Canaan Valley, and I'm learning what I have to learn in order to do this, and it's been a 20-year process. The 10 sales that have occurred to date are the Highland Market building. These are done strategically to appeal to get buyers who run businesses that are public facing and relevant for everybody. And so we ended up with Heritage Distillery buying it, so we now have 2 nice businesses in there. Blackwater Bikes, we attracted them to relocate their business, build a new building. Then that was sold to another individual who had bought the lot next to us, next to Blackwater Bikes. It's a 60-foot lot, so he combined those 2 parcels. So what we have is a new Blackwater Bikes building. It was originally a Riverwalk piece of land, and it was subdivided and outsold, and then a piece next to it that is about to get an addition that will have, in all likelihood, retail. Then there's the 533 William, or Old Shop and Save, which I think probably everybody's familiar with the plans for that at this point. It's a large multi-use project. And then there's most recently the closing of 6 home sites that are surveyed, sold, and recorded, and taxes being paid, etc. Now I want to dive in on the amenities. This has got to do with primarily the residential part of Davis Riverwalk, which includes the parts that are not yet sold off. There is first a roadway called Riverwalk Place. You may have seen the sign. You have to get a DOT permit to put an apron up to a road. You can't just do that on any road. But then you have HOA lands, and within that, I'm going to cover what Judy Rod of Friends of the Blackwater, who's with us tonight, has helped me with in terms of locating, editing, crafting. I think Jeanette, you helped a little bit with that, but then had to go away on leave. But we have got that ordered and funded. And then there is a thing called the Upper Pavilion, which will be on HOA land. I'll go into each of these in more detail after this overview. And then there's public pedestrian egress routes that are important, and the familiar boat ramp or gravel road down to the river that used to be used by the fire trucks to get water, and now it's used for fishermen and that sort of thing. And then there is this idea, this target opportunity of the donation of a strip of land along the river, which I'll call the parkland donation. And then what people may not be as familiar with, but I think is probably the most exciting of all of them, is a footbridge to the Blackwater Falls State Park, which actually the land across the river from Riverwalk was Allegheny Power when I started doing this development, and it got bought by Blackwater Falls State Park, so it was very fortunate that that worked out, with handicap parking. So let me go in, and I'll take a question if there's time for each one of these, maybe one or two questions. This is the roadway, the yellow where I've put in, follow the yellow brick road. That is Riverwalk Place. You probably see people digging, you see the sign, but that's the general route of it. And its intention is to serve those homes and also by deeded egress, the loading and unloading to the back of 533 William. Does anybody have any questions about that road?
Is that gonna be the same road as the road that's there now?
It's a slightly different location by the time you get over to it. It's the same, well, of course, this is all new. Then it's the same-ish in here, same in here, but then what is currently the road is actually on the property of the 533 William owners, and that's gonna be their loading and unloading area. So the road is gonna get pulled away from their building far enough to provide for that. And then, of course, this is new territory down here because the way the quote-unquote alley, which is undeeded, that goes is it whips back up and goes along in here. So, but I'll go into that in more detail. Let's consider this road. This is a question I'm hoping everybody will be thinking about, because as planning is going on, there's opportunities regarding those three landowners, Parks and Rec, me, and Steve White, to potentially come up with a great solution for the town, but we would need to collaborate. So is this road gonna be a no outlet dead end? Or is this road going to be a throughway? Well, the answer to that lies in a contingency. We've got to get this property owner, the town does, got to get that property owner to agree to egress in some way, shape, or form before Riverwalk Place is just gonna dump people off into somebody's private property with no deeded egress. And then the second contingency to that, and we've put this all in a term sheet, a memorandum of understanding that's been presented to the council about last year, is that we'd like to turn over the road after we build it with private money to the town, kind of like Tuscan Ridge was, the roads in Tuscan Ridge, for ongoing maintenance. So if we meet those two criteria, I think if it's desirable, you could have not only a through road there, but potentially lots of parking going along that 90-foot strip. Does anybody have any questions about those comments about the road? This is the HOA land. It's not an exact representation, it's conceptual. This is being surveyed right now. So essentially the way, in the absence of zoning, we felt that in order to maintain a quality appearance of such a high-profile volume of homes out on the main street when you drive right in, that we needed to have rules. We needed to have some rules. And we needed to have land around those homes with those rules to provide a buffer. So what you see here, the blue line, it's kind of cobbled up in the upper right-hand corner because we don't know exactly what we're doing back there yet. The survey is ongoing, and there's a water line back there and so forth, so we don't want to be, we can't be on top of that. But ultimately, the footprint is the outer perimeter of that blue line. Yes?
Most cities' lots in town are 40-foot lots.
Yes.
What are your lots? Because That looks like a lot of buildings in a small amount of
Well,
space.
I should say, this is the concept prepared by Mills Group before we ever did the surveys. And the way it worked out with the surveys, based on the size houses that are these first 6, is that they're anywhere from 40 to 60 feet wide, basically. But they're not 132 feet deep. Because we have HOA back there.
So how do you put it?
They vary, so like,
What's the smallest?
right, I think they're all around a tenth, I think, of an acre, but they kind of, each one's a little bit plus and minus on the plat for the first. But we want to do smaller lots as we go in here, because there's just a need. Everybody doesn't want a 1,600 square foot house. Some people would prefer like a 1,000 square foot house or something like that. So these lots are not really like lots where you spread out and do stuff. They're just home sites. And the HOA is really the land that the house is existing.
But you still don't know how many feet the smallest one is?
How many square
Lengthwise?
feet? About 36, so far, the models that we've created. Yeah, they're about 36, but the ones that went into phase, there's 136 plus 8 to 10 foot deck on the back, plus projecting porch on the front, plus bump out on the side, but they're roughly 40 by 22 main volumes. Does that make sense? Anybody have any other questions on the HOA footprint?
But the lots are 40 feet wide.
They're not consistent. Some are shorter and wider, and so we're doing variations on the architecture for that. But some are deeper and, closer to 40 feet.
So how much footage is it gonna be from the edge of the house to the edge of the properties?
3 foot. Yeah. But it's more than 3 feet for the majority of the volume of the house. It's just where we have bump outs. That touches our setback. Does that make sense?
So your next door neighbor could have his window 6 feet from your window?
Not really, because it's the bump out that's creating the nexus with the setback, and they're another, 10 feet back with the main volume of the house. And what we're doing with, I'm also I'm not a qualified architect, but I'm a hack designer, and people think I'm a good designer. And so I, together with an architect, have design contracts with each of the owners, and it's optional to them, but so far everybody's doing it, to basically design in a certain vernacular, a certain look, which is kind of a folk Victorian look with a little bit of rustic and industrial leaning to it. It's very Davis.
Steve, could you tell us what you mean by a bump out? I'm not familiar with
Oh,
that term.
like in a lot of the traditional houses, you have a main house here in town, and then you have a little one-story chunk that sticks out the side because they added a bathroom in, say, the 1920s or whatever. That's a bump out. It just adds interest to an otherwise bland, rectangle. So it's just like a cube sticking out the side, typically with a shed-style roof instead of a gable roof.
So are these based more on like a tiny home?
No, the first 6 range from 1,600 to 1,900 square feet, so tiny home would be more like, maybe 300 square feet or 500 on a good day.
But they're not they're not like single level, they're
No.
double level.
No. Yeah, so far, no single levels. I am also designing homes for a couple of other people that like what they saw here, who own lots in the grid. And one of them is single level, and it's pretty cool.
Just a couple of questions. I didn't realize that the town maintained Tuscan Ridge roads.
Is that the case?
true?
You don't.
We haven't accepted those roads.
Oh, you haven't? I thought that was like the deal.
You do not.
Who does plow? Tuscan Ridge? Oh, okay. Maybe it was just something they were talking about doing. But they did agree to provide the infrastructure, they just didn't take on the roads.
Well, they agreed to put in the infrastructure, which they reneged on.
Went belly up on. But did DOT accept those roads?
No,
Huh.
I don't think so.
Okay. I've always been told that DOT did.
The other question I had, if the town won't accept your roads, are you building them to DOH standards?
Yes.
Okay.
Tonight also with Judy is Jim Christie with Civil and Environmental Engineering Consultants. They did the infrastructure for Davis Riverwalk. They also do various trails and public spaces with hardscaping and landscaping all through the region. Jim, you're a landscape architect, but you come with a team that includes engineers, and yes, they do all the engineering. And we'll get to some comments from Jim in a second. Another amenity area is at William Avenue. This is the historical marker area. That little star is where approximately we want to put one, those black and white signs that tell the history of an area. We've got one on order that was approved by the state of West Virginia, talking about the West Virginia and Cumberland Railroad and the mills that surround the area. And it's just to sort of help bring people into an understanding of the industrial heritage of the area. And instead of just having it sitting by the road that you kind of look at as you drive by, we're gonna have boulders around it in a semicircle, and gravel and some hardscaping with a couple of native spruce and Viking aspen. And just have a green space that people can linger and kind of take that in. It's also, I think, in terms of collaboration for public use, there's the festivals or any kind of thing like that. Basically, that's HOA land. It could be just by talking to the HOA president, say, yeah, we're having the Art Spring Festival or whatever. Can we spread out on that piece of property? Yeah, sure. Same thing as we've always done. This is another HOA amenity. This is something called Upper Pavilion. This is where you would drive in, and then there's a little artery that comes off, and there's gonna be some parking spots here, and a structure here that, actually the design of it is a little different than this rendering. It's a pavilion with then a pier projecting out from under it a few feet, so people can go out and look up the river and look down the river. And then we're working with Friends of Blackwater and Judy about additional historical, like informational kiosks there to say things like, up there would be where the tannin mill is, across the river is where the rails brought in the hemlocks, up there is where the pallets and the pulp mill were. Those kinds of things to let people imagine the industrial heritage of the area. And we'll have several spots, including a handicap spot. And the intention going in is, though it's managed by HOA, is to let it be open to the public for short-term parking every day, dawn to dusk. We'll see how that goes, and the HOA has to govern that, but that's our intention. Does anybody have any questions about the Upper Pavilion? Egress, how are people gonna get through to the park, going from left to right? What we were just talking about, the Upper Pavilion, there'll be a trail right next to it that goes down to the riverfront for people that wanna walk the Riverside Trail or fish or whatever. Of course, at the historic marker, there'll be pedestrian egress. And then the third one over, the long line you see, when we sold that warehouse to FSRM, we negotiated deeded egress for pedestrians, for the general public, to go along the west side of that warehouse and to the property line. So the intention, it's all in this memorandum of understanding, is to get that pedestrian route all the way as deeded access to the water. And the fourth area, of course, would be if you're in the Davis Town Park, you can pick up the Riverside Trail from the park, make it one continuous thing. So if there's, say, 1,000 foot of riverfront in the Davis Riverfront Park, there's another 1,200 feet of riverfront you can now add on to that, and it would be legit public access to that.
So none of that access will actually be big enough for, like, say, us to get a fire truck down
Yeah.
to the river?
No, it's engineered to be big enough for emergency vehicles and a fire truck to get back there. This is a very rough delineation of what we call parkland donation. It's an intention. It's got its own contingencies. But basically, the idea is as we get close to finishing the project, then we transfer that riverfront to a park entity. Now, the park entity that looks to be in the most interested and the most qualified is West Virginia DNR on behalf of the Blackwater Falls State Park. So far, so good with those conversations. They have a term sheet in front of them as well. Now, this is, to me anyway, a very exciting part. From going back 20 years, and I've met with previous leaders of the Blackwater Falls State Park, we always envisioned a pedestrian bridge over here in the lower left-hand corner at the USGS gauging station. And that turns out to not be as good a location for a whole list of reasons, and Jim came to me and Judy and said, what would you think about locating it front and center for Davis, to be visible? And I said, that's great, let's design it, we'll include it in the deal, for the park donation. What does that bridge look like? So the left is downtown Davis, and on the right is Blackwater Falls State Park. And there is looked to me to be about 28 by 28 or something, sheltered area that is elevated for viewing. And then maybe it's better, Jim, maybe you could comment at this point and just say a few things about the bridge.
Sure. So the Blackwater River has a large floodway, and that floodway is approximately 200 feet all the way through town. Even at the narrow points in the river, the floodway is still about that same pattern. So that bridge and the locations out of that floodway, there still would have to be HEC-RAS studies to make sure you're not creating any additional issues. But that's over a 200-foot span for a pedestrian bridge to not have piers within that. And that allows for the two platforms that you can hang out on, see the river, access that point. And then once it gets to the Blackwater Falls State Park, we call it river left. If you're rafting down the river or floating down the river, river left, river right. So river left would be the park side. On that river park side, we're designing a trail that takes you through Blackwater Falls State Park and all the way to Thomas, and it would connect to that piece. So you would begin here, and you can actually take that trail, and that's probably another presentation.
That's next slide. But, and I think somebody commented that DNR, in conjunction with this project and adopting that land, that parkland, would increase the trout stocking immediately in Davis to try to encourage the use of the fishing trail that they will build along the riverside. Let's put this in context. The bridge is pretty significant by itself, but when you consider the initiative of Friends of the Blackwater creating the Blackwater River Loop Trail, I mean, it's just can't be emphasized enough how important easy trails that are not overly long are to the economic development of a town. And I know the strategic planning is going on right now. Montgomery County, where I'm raising my kids in Maryland, they get it. Parks and Rec is all over that, building another mile of trail every morning because they know it directly relates to the economic benefit of the area, the economic development of the area. And this, I think, this Blackwater Loop that goes from Davis, this bridge then becomes the starting point from Davis for the Blackwater Loop Trail. It becomes the gateway to the Blackwater Falls State Park, and the falls themselves are only 1.5 miles away, the #1 tourist destination in West Virginia. And it's an underutilized viewing side of the falls, so it would amp that up. And then it goes on to Douglas, around to Thomas, and as I understand it, Judy, you're working on the last segment. Maybe you would want to say a few things about the Blackwater Loop Trail and how the bridge fits in, or whatever you want to say.
And Judy, you need to be very brief because we're over time already.
Oh, okay. Well, we are very excited because we got a grant from the Abandoned Minelands people, a pilot grant to begin work on this trail. And then last month, we learned that we got an additional grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission, part of which can go to the trail as well. So, even though bridges are expensive, we expect to build a number of bridges and improve trail tread in the park. Some of it quite near to the town of Davis, to get on that, what's called the river trail, that takes you, basically to the gentle view of the falls. And then you would cross the bridge there and you're at Blackwater. But you can continue on, and the biggest part of our building project on the loop trail is to build a bridge over Douglas Falls, or below Douglas Falls. A suspension bridge that'll be for pedestrians, and once you cross that, then you're on the old railroad grade. And that's what takes you into Thomas.
Good, thank you.
Yeah,
So,
and
Yep.
wait a minute. As part of this project, which is the signs for downtown Davis to go on historic building, we also had some money to do signs in the state park. And now that we have this bridge concept, these signs can go on one of those pavilions that are part of the bridge. And really, and this bigger one is to be on a 5-foot sign that would be the whole view, that explains the whole view you're seeing from the other side. So it could be attached to one of those little pavilions, and people could, as he was saying, see where the tannery was, see where the sawmill was, and see where the pulp mill was, and reimagine that period of history.
So I just think that work is so significant to economic, it's not why you're doing it, but I think that it is very significant to economic development for the town of Davis. That
It's also fun.
is it. Thank you.
Chief, you keep mentioning pedestrians, is that a good concept?
Yeah, shorthand, pedestrians or bikes, that's kind of my criteria. I'm an avid mountain biker. I'm not letting any of that stuff happen without bikes being invited to the party.
About 4 ways.